Good morning again. So for my total pleasure this morning for a second conversation, let me tell you something about our guest today. So first of all, my name is Uri Schneider. I lead at Schneider Speech. We do have an amazing AirPods giveaway. If anyone wants to win a free pair of AirPods, it is the non-denominational holiday season, or however you experience these days, but it's a giving time and everybody's looking for a new gadget, right? So we're giving away AirPod Pros. This might be the conversation you find a highlight. We're looking for people just to share a highlight from these conversations over this year of conversations to bring out something we can all share at the end of the year, a highlight reel. Share a highlight from this conversation. We'll enter you into win a free pair of AirPods. Just go to our blog page, schneiderspeech.com/blog/contest. That's it. I'll leave it there. And with that, I'll just share that Derek Daniels, Dr. Derek Daniels, I'll do the formal intro, but let me also say this. When I would go to a conference, there were many people I would enjoy, picking their brain. We often would have breakouts, and all of us kind of look around the room, and let's be honest, there were certain people you wanted to be in their breakout, and there were certain people you were like, I hope that guy is not in my breakout session. Derek Daniels was the guy that I wanted to be in his breakout session, because Derek Daniels would add a level of insight, of wisdom, and like I wrote in the description, I really feel he is the embodiment of this very subtle blend of a very intuitive, empathic, tuned in human being, while at the same time he asks you the challenging questions that you didn't think of because you didn't think it through long enough, or you didn't know about that research, or you didn't go to that other workshop. The man is incredibly well informed. He's moving things forward with his own research, which hopefully we'll be able to hear a bit about. And he's also the president-elect of our professional organization in Michigan. It is a tremendous privilege. I'm going to skip the formal intro. You could read the bio for that. Let's get right to getting in real. It's a tremendous privilege to have Dr. Derek Daniels. John Gomez calls him Double D in his alter ego at Camp Shoutout. And so thanks for taking the time to join us, Derek.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm just overwhelmed. And yes, I really, and the feelings are mutual. You're someone who I always enjoy talking to. We've met twice at the National Stuttering Association's annual conference, and we've been able to speak, but not enough, not as much as I would like to. So I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation.
Well, I kind of invited you to have that excuse, and I was so happy we had let's get on the call for 5 minutes before this, about a month ago, and it turned into 2.5 hours, and someone was pulling me off the phone or something like that. So yeah, it's always a privilege and a pleasure, and this is just an excuse, and we got to make more excuses.
Absolutely, we do.
So what would you like to share? What do you think would be interesting that people that you'd be proud to share or interested in sharing about your journey and what makes you who you are, how you tick, and what makes you go?
Well, I think my journey as a person who stutters is probably like a lot of people's journeys as people who stutter. I've had those classic experiences of not, trying to say something and not being able to say it like I want to, and feeling embarrassed about it. And, and for me, I think I really didn't have a whole lot of knowledge about stuttering. It was something that I did as early as I can remember. Talking has always been difficult for me, and I didn't have any knowledge about stuttering. I didn't know anything about the field of speech language pathology. So a lot of my growing up years were, with regard to stuttering, were about trying to navigate something that's pretty difficult. And actually, I made some notes here that I think when I think about my stuttering, it was really sort of a metaphor for my life in general. Because when I think about stuttering and trying to talk, I came up with sort of 3 different ways of how I sort of dealt with that. Number 1 is just going ahead and struggling through it at the risk of judgment from other people. Altering what I want to say so that it appeared to be acceptable, and then just keeping it inside and not saying anything so that no one knew. And even though those three sort of choices were around stuttering, I think they became a metaphor for my life in general. You know, struggling and being open with something at the risk of judgment, um, altering yourself so that it appears acceptable, and then just keeping something inside so that no one knows. So I think my journey throughout life has just been about that. Although, you know, I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. I went to good schools. I always made good grades. But it was just this feeling. Yes.
Doug Scott was very interested to know if you consider and if you identify your identity as more of a Houstonian or from Michigan. He was interested in that.
I am a Houstonian at heart, for sure. I was born and raised in Houston, and I'm definitely a Houstonian. I'm a Michigander too. I live in Detroit, and I love Detroit, but certainly I am a Houstonian, all things Houston. Yes, Doug. Yeah, Doug's a good friend of mine. We met in Houston, and we are good friends to this day. But, you know, I just think that's just my journey. And I really didn't, I was a very attentive person, very internal person. And I didn't really find out about the field of speech pathology until I was probably, I think, a junior in college. And then so I had to, you know, switch my major, and, you know, I found out about it then. But I think my journey throughout life is a lot like most people's journeys as people who stutter, in terms of just not being able to, I didn't have speech therapy at all. So the only therapy I ever had for stuttering was when I was a client for a graduate student when I was my post-bachelor's program. So in that sense, I think my experience is probably a little bit different than most people's experiences.
Well, it's interesting, and what a wonderful segue into your contributions to the literature. We talked on the call. You said your experience wasn't that different than anyone else's, but I know you're interested in looking at, does the culture that one is living in impact the experience that one has, or from within oneself, the way they engage that process, or maybe from the people around you and the way their perceptions of stuttering might be different based on cultural beliefs and attitudes and values. Would you like to share a little bit about what you discovered and why that's relevant?
Yeah, and I think what I'll say about that is that is really important to me. I was a sociology major when I was in college as an undergraduate student. So sociology taught me a lot about the world and how the world works. And so I became really, really curious about those issues when I was in college. But also what I will say is, you know, growing up as a person who stutters, and then growing up as a Black man, and then, you know, I have other parts of my identity that are important that I don't necessarily talk as openly about, but are very, I think, shaped how I see the world. I just always wonder, does anyone else experience what I experience? And so my personal journey, coupled with my undergraduate degree in sociology, really made me curious about culture. And there's a really nice quote about culture and about identity. It's by Beverly Daniel Tatum. She's the author of a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And one quote that she says is, when she's talking about identity, she says, who am I? The answer depends in large part on who the world around me says I am. Who do my parents say that I am? Who do my peers say that I am? What message is reflected back to me in the voices of my neighbors, my teachers, store clerks? What do I learn from the media about myself? How am I represented in the cultural images around me, or am I missing from the picture altogether? I can't believe I said that from memory. So I just sort of dived right into that research. And my early research looked at the experiences of African-American men who stutter. It was one of the first projects that I did. So I interviewed 6 African-American men about their experiences with stuttering. And there was lots of individual variation in their stories, but a lot of them talked about the fact of being stigmatized as a Black man, and how that coupled with being stigmatized as a person who stutters. You know, one participant talked a lot about how in his particular culture and his particular community, stuttering and stuttering openly was not something that was very accepted. So he tried his best to to hide his stuttering as much as possible when he was around certain people and in certain cultures and communities. But I think when it comes to culture, I think it's really difficult to sort of say that all people within a culture experience stuttering this way. I think there's a lot of individual variation with how people experience culture. But I think what you take in from your environment in terms of beliefs and attitudes, I think can affect how you view yourself and how you view your stuttering. So that really interested me in these individual experiences that people who stutter have based on their culture.
That's really interesting. I was interested if you could dive deeper into those 6 people that you did those interviews with, or other observations in terms of, are there things that seem to be tightly correlated and then others that seem to have more variability even within one culture, meaning how much of it seems to be disjointed from that cultural identity or cultural experience, and what things seem to be very strongly influenced by that, different dimensions or different angles, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I think now just with the 6 participants, it's really hard to generalize. I think just in general, stigma was, I think, a really big theme that was probably highly correlated, that I would say, with the participants that I interviewed, the idea of being stigmatized. And I think what I will go back to with that is, you and I had a conversation and you said something that really stuck with me, and I think it's very relevant here, is to what extent is there a space for difference when you're growing up? And the extent to which people feel like there's little room for difference, it makes a big difference in how they view themselves and their stuttering. And I think for the people I talked to, there was very little space for difference when it came to stuttering. So that was probably a very common thing that I observed. And the more space there is for difference, the more people are able to sort of explore and accept their stuttering. And I actually came up with this illustration about that is literally, if you're in an elevator, there's very little room to move around. You're very confined. Whereas, if you've ever seen the movie The Sound of Music and Julie Andrews is out there in the field and she's moving around very freely, there's a lot of room for difference. So that's on a literal level. So I think on a metaphorical level, many people, we all have our elevator moments where we don't feel like there's a big space for difference. And we have our open field moments where there's a lot of space for difference and a lot of room to move around. So I think for the people that I talk to, there seem to be a lot of those elevator moments, little space for difference.
That is such a profound image. And I think if we think about that, I shared something earlier this week, a little big reveal that occasionally I would take appointments in one of the offices, but similar to my dad, I like the outdoors. And David Shapiro, one of our colleagues and GOAT's greatest of all times, talks about taking walks with his therapist. Now, certainly one has to think about the responsibility and one can't, you have to be very responsible with the ethics and the regulations of everything involved in this, but certainly where it's possible, and certainly if it's an adult, having a meeting outside the office can be a great thing. So I would have some of my meetings with people running around Central Park. And one of the things I think about Central Park is it's kind of like Julie Andrews Field, situated right in the middle of the elevator. So I think sometimes we have this idea, oh, I'll relax when I go on vacation this summer.
Right.
Oh, I'm waiting for the weekend because that's when I can breathe. And I think that it's so important. I'm thinking of the conversation I had with Michael Sugarman, the importance of finding ways to do good self-care, not letting the circumstances kind of dictate what we believe we're capable of, but certainly acknowledging and having the allies around us acknowledging what are the constraints with which we are moving our ball forward. And at times we need a little bit of help from our friends. And that's something we should all be open to, is mentorship, peer support, guidance. These are some things I'm obsessed with lately, and I think are incidentally baked into our work and into the community, but I'm looking at ways in 2021 to create more of that, where people kind of come in at an early stage in the journey and very quickly have the opportunity to give support to those that are just a few steps behind.
Right.
And as they keep going forward, emerging as those mentors and eventually some as leaders. People like yourself, people who stutter, who then go into this field, are certainly heroes in my eye.
Right.
Not everywhere in the world does a person who stutters welcome into the profession dedicated to treating the condition and people living with stuttering. So that's part of something that's also a celebration and something quite impressive. I think if I had a stutter, I don't think I would become a speech pathologist, speech language pathologist. I don't think I would have it in me. I think it takes a certain amount of putting yourself out there and courage. But back to my other point, I think it's so important that wherever we find ourselves, or if we are in the position to provide others, creating that space, not just a safe space,
Right.
but a space to breathe, to be, even when it feels like, or you're literally in an elevator, having the tools to do that, to create little micro vacations. So whether it's stepping out of the office, or for parents spending a few quality minutes with each child, if not every day, every week. For ourselves, not to be on Zoom calls from 9 to 5. If it only means we can carve little 5 minutes, cherish, protect, carve those 5 minutes that you literally put your face out the window, even if it's negative, I don't know what, Michigander weather. What are your thoughts about how to create that space and that Julie Andrews image in the midst of a world where we feel so unnatural and sometimes so confined and pressed by either things in our life or just the technology and work demands, school demands? What are any wisdom, personal, professional?
I love that. Sometimes for me, it's just turning off the news, turning off the TV. I mean, early on in March, in April, I had to just and I'm definitely wanting to be informed of what's going on. But there are times where I just have to turn the TV off or just switch the channel and turn to a channel that I love to watch. I love to watch old 80s TV shows. I love to watch cooking channels. So I would either watch something different or just say, I'm going to just, watch this much of the news. And then
I'm a sucker for Growing Pains. What about you?
Oh, my Growing Pains, Give Me a Break, Nell Carter, 227, The Jeffersons, all those shows.
If you don't know what we're talking about, Google it,
Google
Netflix,
it, yes.
whatever. It's got to be somewhere. Where do you consume this? Can you tell people your secret? Where can you get access to these sitcoms?
Yes, Antenna TV. It's the Antenna TV channel if you have that. And I just discovered there's a channel called The Decades. So one of those two channels, or just go to YouTube.
That's great. So if you're not watching stuttering documentaries or reading journal research, that's where to go. Nothing about the media, nothing about politics, but there's a lot of repetition of news that's not that exciting. Who was that guy that was doing some really cool news program, like the Good News Network? Emily Blunt's husband, what's his name? John Krasinski, right? From The Office. So
Okay.
He did a little thing on YouTube and then he stopped because it's exhausting. But specifically when everything was so overwhelming, he started a thing. I think it was called the Good News Network. If you know what it was, put it in the comments. But it was awesome and it's still relevant. You can go watch it. He just asked kids to submit stories and just share like little bright moments. For example, when the whole community decided we're going to drive by the nursing home where all the people are kind of in quarantine and we're going to beep loud and we're going to lean out the window and in a socially distanced, safe way, bring a little bit of cheer and let them know we care. Let them know we see them.
Absolutely.
So for you, it's 80s television. But from the research, and from your research, let's say we're thinking about a Black young man who stutters. And let's say we're a parent, a teacher, an ally. Are there any messages or any actions that you would suggest that those of us who might be in that position, a teacher, a parent, a friend, a neighbor, that would maybe be appreciated and maybe be supportive and helpful, and at the same time not stepping in where we're not welcome or assuming that they're interested in X, Y, or Z in a way that would kind of overtake their dignity and their space?
Yeah, I think it's all about the individual experience that the person has. So I like to talk about it a lot from inside out approach as opposed to an outside in approach. So an outside in approach is basically saying, you know, this person is X, Y, or Z, so therefore I have to do X, Y, and Z. An inside out approach is, let me talk to this individual and let me see what's important and what's relevant to them. And then I'll know if X, Y, or Z might be appropriate. Because again, there's always variation within any group of people. So, you know, I think representation is important. I think talking about interests are important. So, you know, if the family, if they have, you know, myths about stuttering, you know, that are not true or not accurate, it's maybe important to have a discussion about that. You know, depending on family interactions and family dynamics and having conversations around stuttering, you know, some families don't have any conversations around stuttering because maybe they don't know how to. That might be appropriate to facilitate if that's an issue. But I like to really just get to know my clients on an individual level and sort of let their interests and their cultural experiences emerge from what they tell me. So I guess it really all depends on what the person in front of me is talking to me about. But I think in treatment, I like to always include or always make space for conversations. I was working, you know, this semester with a client. He's 10 years old, and it just warms my heart to see him smile because he struggles a lot with his stuttering. We were just talking about, you know, who his best friend is. And then he has all of these different like video shows on YouTube that he loves to watch. And just seeing him talk about that, even though he was stuttering a lot, it just warmed my heart just to see him smile. So I always like to make space in the therapy session for clients to be able to just talk about what makes them happy. Sometimes we do coping cards where there's, and I got this idea from Lisa Scott, who's, as you know, has since passed on. But we just take these index cards, and on the front of each index card, we write a situation that's tough or a situation that's difficult. And then on the back of the index card, we write things that make us happy. So if I'm experiencing, you know, sadness over not being able to say something, you know, what can I do in that moment to make myself happy? Flip the card over. You know, I can watch a favorite TV show, or I can read a book, or, you know, whatever the clients tell me. But it actually works for the client. You know, he was able to take that card out and flip it over and do something for 5 or 10 minutes that made him happy. And that sort of diffused that moment that just happened.
I'm seeing lots of comments. You've got lots of fans. We've got like
Oh, wow.
more engagement than usual. It's
Wow.
like 30 people with us right now live. And
Really?
I have no doubt many more will be enjoying this conversation. So just to point out, you can see this conversation and all the conversations. They're all on schneiderspeech.com/our blog. I'll just reiterate, free AirPod giveaway. Anybody that wants to get free AirPods, it's very simple. We want to give away free AirPods because we need help and we want to co-create something together. If you hear anything in this conversation or any of the nearly 40 conversations that we'll have had by the end of 2020, we want to put together a highlight reel. So if you go over to our blog page, there's a post there and you can just get the details. Basically, just give us a quote and the timestamp of which talk it happened in, and you're entered into the raffle. Give us 2, you're entered in twice. It's a great opportunity to give, and it's a great opportunity to get. I'm going to take some of those questions. So pop your questions, pop your notes, comments. There's a lot of love coming your way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I'll go there. Maybe while I collect those, but I was going to ask you one of the questions that I'm fascinated by, and you talked about one of your first speech therapy experiences was with a grad student.
Yes.
I was wondering if that was a watershed moment or if there was something special in your journey that you credit as a turning point, as something that was a breakthrough moment, and if there was anyone or any experience, because I think it's helpful for others to learn about, well, what were those moments in someone else's life?
Right.
It adds complexity and a composition of all the different types of experiences. For some, it's excelling on the athletic field, and for others, it's embracing a creative pursuit. For others, it's creating a beautiful space of yoga and meditation for young kids could be a beautiful way to kind of strengthen and creates wellness within a world that's very chaotic and challenging. So I like to find out, and I'm always amazed at different things. So I was wondering if you had, any such thing in your journey.
Yeah, it's something I have to think about a little bit, but one of the moments I think I can tell you about for sure that comes to my mind was now as background, I wasn't really used to talking about how I felt. I really wasn't really used to saying or discussing or talking about what I felt on the inside. So that was something that I wasn't used to. But I do remember when I was in the 7th grade, and this was computer literacy class. And, during different parts, on various days, there were chapter terms at the end of a chapter, and he would go around and have each person read the bold-faced word and then read the definition of the word. And I always had a hard time because of my stuttering with that. And my 7th grade teacher would oftentimes embarrass me about my stuttering. So I do remember that I had 3 friends at the time, and I wrote them a letter just talking about how embarrassing that was for me. And I didn't even know why I did it. I just did it. And the next day, I remember one of my 3 friends came to me and she said, the next time he does that to you, we're going to stand up and tell him how wrong that was, how wrong that is. And I cannot tell you in my 13-year-old body how good that felt to know that someone else understood me and they would advocate on my behalf. So that experience in the 7th grade really taught me a lot about advocacy. It taught me about being able to stand up for someone else, being able to be that safe space, that shoulder for someone else. That experience, I even many years later, I think just recently, I found this person on Facebook and told her how much that experience meant to me. That moment of what they did or what she said to me stayed with me all of these years. So I think that was probably a big turning point in terms of me feeling safe. I think in my own therapy, I just had a couple of months of therapy. Again, I was a client for a grad student. And a lot of what I did was just practice talking, even if it was in front of an empty room. I think just the idea of physically standing up in a space, and even though there was no one in the room, or sometimes she'd bring in 1 or 2 people, just that act of doing that, I think did a lot for my confidence, just being able to do something like that. So that, if anything, I think that gave me a lot of confidence.
What possessed you?
Yes.
What kind of, I call those like almost like crazy thoughts. I asked a young person in 7th grade, for example, I was doing a Zoom call with this kid, Drew, and I'm so excited. Just yesterday, I had in mind this lacrosse superstar who I had worked with a year ago, and he was on my mind as a mentor. And then out of the blue, he emailed me, made the intro, and now they're mentor and mentee, and mom's in the circle, and it's a beautiful thing. But this kid Drew, he was on the phone with me, and he made a call to a bagel place, and the bagel place kind of very impatient, very busy.
Yeah.
And they gave him a hard time, and he got a bit stuck, and he hung up the phone. And it was the first time I saw Drew's face just kind of drop like that. And I said to Drew, I see, I get it. That must happen sometimes. He said, yeah. I said, I haven't seen that face before. I'm happy to be able to understand that that's what it must be like sometimes. You want to tell me more about that? And we unpacked it a little bit. But then I said, well, what would you like to do when that happens? And he was like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, let's think of some crazy ideas. You can't punch him in the face because he's not in front of you. But considering some out of the box ideas really gets them thinking. I think at Chris and Camilla, problem solving, consider all the options. But he said I could give my mom the phone, but he came up with all kinds of ideas. What you did, Derek, is something I would maybe put out there once we had some rapport and kind of explored the more traditional ones. What in the world possessed you to reach out to those friends? Because that is such a gutsy, big play, right? Most people, and there's someone here, I just want to read you this question. I don't know them yet, but they say it's Jamie Justin or Justine.
Oh, yes, I know who that is. Former
Great.
student.
So she's from Allen Park, and she says, hey, Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
or as John would say, double D. Also, Eric Raj, I'll just make a couple quick shout outs. Your whole camp shout out is like totally shouting over everybody in the comments. We got Laura Shepard, we got Eric Raj, we got John Gomez. Of course, Doug Scott showed up. He wasn't sure he could. I knew he would. Anita's here. Tom is here. You the man, Dr. Derek. Joshua Lawrence.
Yes.
He was honored to work with you in Stuttering Clinic and lucky to have experienced working with people who stutter. Thanks to you. Frederick Mann.
Oh yeah, from my days. Yep.
Maddie Nichols. Maddie Nichols. R.D. A.A.R.D. Says, go Dr.
Yes.
D.
Yes, I know who that is. My colleague, Aaron Hardy-Smith. Yes.
Ron Kelly. Ron Kelly, fond memories of times at camp. Shout out.
Yes.
You're looking great this morning. I agree.
That's an inside joke. I know that. Yeah.
Dale Robertson.
Dale Robertson, yes.
So your student was asking, excuse me one sec. Don't worry, I'm seeing the pulmonologist tomorrow. It's a long story, but it's not COVID. It's an allergic cough. If you've been watching any of these conversations, you've been watching me coughing away. So she asked, what do you do for easing a child's anxiety in the classroom? The kiddo doesn't really stutter when he's with me, but he says he has trouble in the classroom. So I wonder if you could tie that into this gutsy move that you did when you were a kid. What were you thinking? What possessed you to do such a gutsy thing? And what would you suggest in terms of what that might inform others?
Yeah, I think I do a lot of with kids. So, and for the question there, I do problem solving plans. This is something that I know Kristen Camilla has written about in the School Age Attitudes book. So a problem solving plan is basically where you are taking a problem and you sort of are talking about the different steps of the problem. So we do a lot of problem solving plans and talking things out with children. I think talking to the classroom teacher, I think rather than having this all be on the child, having discussions with the teacher about how to make the classroom more sensitive and more accepting.
I just want to amplify that. I think a lot of times we think of the person who's being bullied or the person who's having a hard time,
right?
They need to be beefed up and they need to do X, Y, or Z, or they need to speak up for themselves. We have to recognize there are, multiple stakeholders. And of course, we want to empower individuals to do more for themselves, but especially young people and adults.
Right.
We can't do everything on our own, and we deserve to think about there's no shame and it's not a cop out to say, you know what, here's the measure I can bring to the game. And here's what I want or I need to ask of the teacher. And it can be accommodation on one hand and empowerment on the other. And then ultimately we create more success. So I just wanted to amplify that distinction of what you were saying with the teacher.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times, it's not, if we're talking, I'm not sure how old this child is, but I'm assuming it's a school age child. If someone who's 7, 8, 9 years old, that's a lot to put on a child. That's a lot of emotion for a child to experience. And so certainly we can talk to children and help them talk through those difficult situations, but we should also be talking to the teacher, and we should also be, if possible or whenever possible, talking to the whole class. I know some schools have disability awareness weeks, or however it's navigated, but just the class discussions and also talking with the teacher to see how the classroom can be more supportive for the person. So I think all of those things would be very appropriate. But I think for your earlier question, that's just something that I always, that has stayed with me so long that I just felt the need to just let her know what that did for me. I'm a person anyway who I'm just like that in general. Like I've tracked down all of my elementary school classmates. I just do that. I'm always thinking about people from my past. I found a lot of my elementary school teachers and told them how much of a difference, it made to me to have them as my teacher. So I think just in general, that's kind of the person that I am. But it was really important for me to tell her how much that meant to me.
That's tremendous. I'm just thinking of it. That's so powerful. And it's so often, even today, someone told me already a story, something they didn't think was very influential. And then it comes back 5 years, 10 years later, how significant it was. And I think it's important to do what you did, take your example, because it greases the wheels of that to happen more. if more people find out that what they did made a difference, it had ripples, it
Yes.
touched someone's life, it had a ripple effect, sliding doors effect years down the road, you'll do more things, because often we feel our efforts kind of just get tossed out like yesterday's news. To know that we made a difference, and then to let people know that, and then to be the difference ourselves for others.
Absolutely.
With that student, I just wanted to give a shout out. I'm sure Eric Raj would have some fantastic creative ideas. One thing I like to do is, if there is a creative angle to play there, either drawing comics of what happens in the classroom, or using some digitally facilitated comics. There are some wonderful things on the internet where you can get the characters and just pull them into the box, and you can create a comic strip, so they can actually express, as Derek was saying, how important it is just to air it out. It's a big load for a kid, and they may have no one else to talk to about it. And that time that you have with that child could be the moment. I had one student, and I say student, not a student because he's working with us, but a student, he's a 9th grader, and the teacher demerited the fact that he wasn't participating verbally in class. It was important to her to have verbal participation.
Right.
And he was holding back because he was nervous he would stutter. So he gets a phone call home, and his mom didn't know why he got the phone call, and he's on the consult. We're doing the consult on Zoom, and he says, "Yeah, Mom, didn't you get that call?" And she says, "Oh, that's what it was about?" He says, "Yeah." So I asked the kid, "What did you do about it?" Now, he was about as gutsy as you, Derek, maybe even more. You emailed or messaged or told your friends, right?
Yeah, I did.
This kid sent an email to the teacher without anyone's advice. And he writes, "Dear Mrs. So-and-so, I just want to let you know that you might notice that I don't raise my hand or participate as much. The reason is that I stutter, and I'm nervous that if I talk, I might stutter and I would feel embarrassed. So I would appreciate if you would be understanding, and we can figure out another way for me to earn my participation points, right?"
I love it.
So I said, "That's awesome, man." And he showed us the email on a screen share. I'm like, "Wow." And his parents were like, "Wow." I was like, but he wasn't smiling. I said, "What'd she write back?" And he shows the response, and it was something like this. It was like, "Well, Johnny, exclamation point. At the beginning of the year, you participated so beautifully. I know you can do it. Keep it up. I don't think this can stop you, And also, I want to move your seat to the front so I can see you better and hear more from you. Exclamation point. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow." So then we role played. I played him. I was like reading out his email, and my associate, she read the teacher's response with dramatic effect. And he was the director. He was giving us how to do this acting out thing. But basically, I said, "What'd you do after she wrote back?" He said, "I saw that she wasn't listening, so I just shut up."
Oh.
And that was so concerning
Mhm.
and sad. And thankfully, we've talked with him about how he wants to handle that, what kind of alliance he wants. But before we jump into anyone jumping in, his parents or us, to save him, we want to give him agency and courage and embolden him to push further. And in the end, that's happening. And we set him up with a mentor that went to the exact same high school, who's a guy who stutters, who's gone on in life to couple up and has kids and has a business, and just really achieving a lot that he wished to do. And he went to the same high school, so he could be a really good mentor for this kiddo. But I think, just to amplify what Derek was saying, giving a space to kids.
Yes.
And I guess the biggest mistake I hear, Derek, is like, "I don't hear you stuttering.
Oh,
Must
yes.
not be so bad," right? That would be the worst thing anyone could tell anybody.
I get
Nobody
that.
makes up stuttering.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get that? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. I think because my stuttering, my stuttering has changed over time. My stuttering
Wait,
was a lot
yeah,
more.
if you could talk about that, because there was just a podcast on Stutter Talk,
Yes.
kind of like exploring that. And my father and our team, we've talked a lot about the longitudinal lifespan perspective. And it seems to be, to my father, to us, not as well told a story, but there's almost nobody that stutters the same when they were 20, when they're 40, when they're 50, or when they were 30. You don't see it change as dramatically from 8 to 10,
Yeah.
but there's a pretty common, so if you talk about how that's changed for you, what you were saying.
Yeah, actually, my dad, who I love my dad, he would he made cassette tapes of me when I was younger, so that I can go back and listen to those cassette tapes. And I haven't listened to them in a while, but I know my speech would be something like a I want to do this. That would be an example. So when I was younger, my stuttering was a lot more overt. And I think I did whatever I could to try and hide my stuttering. So I think part of that has to do with that. But I think just over time, my stuttering just sort of changed. And I would probably say I go back and forth between mild and moderate. But sometimes when I tell people that I stutter, I do get that quite a bit. Well, you don't stutter that bad, or but I get that phrase a lot. You don't stutter that, but you don't stutter that much, or your stuttering is not like this person's. It was really bad. And I have to just sort of politely, sort of redirect the conversation about, well, stuttering is different for everybody. Not everyone stutters the same, and it's not just about the behavior. That whole discussion, but that feedback I get quite a bit, and I think it does minimize the experience of stuttering for the person, because stuttering, as we know, is not just about the behavior. It's way much more than that. It's about the experience that you have with it. So that question, that comment, I get quite a bit from people. But yeah, my stuttering was a lot more overt when I was younger, and I went through periods where I probably didn't stutter as much, but it definitely fluctuated over time.
There's a question based on Justine's response, and that was pure gold right there, Derek. Jamie Justine writes, she feels like she just got acknowledged by Beyonce. Thanks, guys. Now, Derek, do you think it was you that she's thinking was Beyonce, or me? I'm definitely not feeling the Beyonce vibe for me.
That's definitely inside. So, yeah, my students know that I love Beyonce, so that's what that reference is for.
Got it. Put a ring on it, baby. You got it. Fantastic.
And there was also another experience I wanted to talk to you, tell you about, that was sort of, I think, monumental for me, that I think might be helpful. Is it was in my adult life. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago. I teach a course called Professional Issues in Speech Pathology. So the students meet with me the first week of their last semester before they go to their internships. So I bring in a series of guest speakers. So one guest speaker came in, and I wanted her to talk about contract companies, like working for contract companies, what they are, how they're different from other types of facilities. And so one of the students asked the speaker, what happens if you get stuck somewhere that you don't like? Like, how would you navigate that? And the speaker said, first of all, I would say that you're never stuck. And then she began to answer the question. But I thought about what she said. First of all, I would say you're never stuck. And I thought about that. And if I go back and reflect on all of the experiences I've ever had, stuttering or not, where I felt stuck, there was always a way out. And so that's sort of like a life lesson, but also a lesson that I think we can pass on to people who stutter, is that even though you may feel stuck, whether it's physically or whether it's socially, you're never stuck. There's always a way out. And so I just found that particular person on Facebook not too long ago. So I will tell her what she said and how it impacted me. But I think that's also another turning point. It's just that lesson of we're never stuck like we think we are.
Wow. What do you have to say about representation and the complexion of our profession? You're going to be stepping into the leadership of the Michigan, Professional Association of Speech Language Pathologists. Mm-hmm. The topic of being tuned in to different experiences of different people in our country, different people in our states, in our cities, in our schools. I just hope people continue to have the conversations that were had and that you and I had when things were at their height of sensitivity and really coming to the forefront earlier this year in the States. But I want to keep that conversation going. And I was wondering if you had any personal, professional, and leadership thoughts on being a Black man in the profession. I mean, just to bring a little humor, just being a man in the profession, yes. I am a minority,
Yeah.
but certainly in no way similar to the experience of people of color in our profession and in the country. So I was
Right.
just wondering if you could share anything on that, and then the intersectionality of that with also, the identity of being a person who stutters.
Yeah, I think as soon as all those terrible events were happening, the Michigan Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, we immediately put out a statement against racism. And what we immediately did was we got together and we talked about it, and we actually made a change in our bylaws. And we added, because we didn't have it before, we added a diversity and inclusion committee. So we are now going to have a vice president for diversity and inclusion, and then that person will lead a diversity and inclusion committee made up of people who are diverse. And what we're going to do is we're going to address the needs of our membership. What are we missing? What are we not seeing? We want to bring in speakers to our conference who can address cultural diversity and different topics. So I think this new vice president of diversity and inclusion and the committee that we will form will be able to survey the membership and find out what people are experiencing, and we can address those issues either through talks or through other means. So representation is everything. Representation is very important. I mean, just think about yourself, or for people who stutter, growing up, the representation was Porky Pig and Elmer Fudd. And so that's all you saw. And so whenever someone would tease someone who stutters, what would they say? You sound like this, because they saw that they know. So I think the more representation we have of different types of people, I think the more awareness it brings. So certainly within the profession, I think a lot of state associations and a lot of universities are doing what they can to increase diversity, not just increase diversity, because diversity just means that you have different people. You also want to include them and retain them as well. So it's diversity and it's also inclusion. So that's something that our state association is doing, and I know a lot of universities are working on it. I know ASHA and in Basla, I think CAPSID, they have had different series, different talks on racism and addressing racism. So I think it's very, very nice that we're having these discussions. I just hope that the discussions don't die off. I hope that we really are able to keep these discussions going and do what we can to foster not just diversity, but also inclusion.
And I couldn't agree more. I think, being engaged in that conversation
Mm.
is not a means to the solution, but in and of itself is part of a proper, way of addressing it, as opposed to leaving it unspoken, unsaid, unrecognized, but grappling with it and grappling with the concerns and the interests that I bring, the concerns and the interests that you bring,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about ways that we can make it a better place for everybody. And what would be something in the next 6 months if you could have your dream in that topic? It doesn't have to be within your sphere of influence, but what would a dream be in a scope of 6 months to 12 months? What would be something you'd like to see happening in our profession and in that regard?
I think I would like to see, in our universities, a lot more faculty of color. I think that would be very important. I think in our university programs, I think it would be really, really great if we could do our part to bring in students of color, more diverse representation in our faculty positions and also in our student body. I'm in the university setting, so those things matter a lot to me. I think that would be a really good thing that I would like to see in the next six months to a year. Um, you know, and I think talking about your point of intersectionality, you know, I think I didn't always think that my experience as a Black man who stuttered really mattered. Well, these are things that I experienced, but I don't think really other people experience. So why talk about it? But and that's, I think, relates to the issue of representation. But the more you hear of other people with similar stories, then you're like, oh, well, that is important. That does matter. So I think even within stuttering, I think we have passing twice, which meets at the NSA conference every year, passing twice as for people who stutter, who are members of the LGBTQ plus community. And every year at the conference, you know, there's always a space where people can get together and talk. But, you know, and the NSA had hosted an intersectionality panel that Tiffany Kittlestad and I co-hosted. So, you know, I think the more diverse voices we are able to hear, the more we are able to know about what our fellow people who stutter experience. So I think it, again, goes back to representation. The more representation we have, the more voices are included, the more we know what the needs are of the people who we work with and who we serve.
Yeah, it's amazing to just, as a person who could take off my yarmulke and suddenly exude tremendous male white privilege, I think I've always thought of myself and strived to be someone who was tuned in, but I've certainly learned a lot this year, and I know I have a lot more to learn. So just want to give a word of commitment on my behalf and our team. It continues to be a very lively conversation in that regard, both in terms of bringing in a full tapestry that represents the composition of humanity, and also to the degree that we don't get there yet, short term, before we change the staffing or the student complexion, just educating ourselves. And there's so much to learn, and we had some on our blog, and we've learned from other people, you know, learning more about the experience of Black people. If you're not Black, you can do a lot to tune in, become educated, and in doing so, you can become a great ally. And the same is true for every other identity that deserves a bit more attention and a bit less marginalization. Would you agree?
Yeah, because you can be in an open field. A person can be in an open field, so to speak, our Julie Andrews analogy, but still have elevator moments. You can have elevator moments in an open field, you know. So
it goes both ways, huh?
both
See,
ways.
that's the flip side of what I was saying. You could create open field moments in the elevator, and that's a really good point there. You could have the opposite. You could be in an open field but feel like you're in a crowded elevator.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow. Last one picked, first one picked on. Things like that. Derek, there was something we talked about. You can take it or you can reject it. We talked about something interesting because I feel like we've engaged and talked about the importance of sensitivity to different cultures and things. We were talking in our phone call privately about, is openness an all or nothing kind of thing, right? And the idea of where, you know, obviously no one should feel the need to suppress who they are. And then at the same time, we were just talking about it being real, man to man, just on that topic of, are there places where you're not selling out if you're not putting that part of your identity on the table, front and center? So for example, if a person who stutters becomes comfortable doing self-advocacy in the classroom and whatnot, but in another place, they don't choose to put it out there as prominently. Is that inherently a problem? Or you know, are there shades of gray and degrees that are still healthy? I was wondering if you wanted to share on that, or if you want to pass on that. It's something I've been thinking about.
You know, I think we all have different social identities, but those carry different degrees of salience for different people. So for example, I know that one time I was sitting at a table, this was at like a dinner, and there was a person who I didn't know, but he stuttered. I was like, oh, he stutters. And so I was like, well, maybe I should like kind of voluntary stutter just so he knows that I stutter. Maybe I should mention that I'm an SLP. You know, how can I work this into the conversation? And he never said to me that he was a person who stutters. He never engaged it. And I thought, well, why does he have to? Maybe for him, stuttering is just not something. I mean, maybe it's not something that's a very salient part of who he is. So, you know, I think we all have different degrees of salience that we assign to our different identities. And I think that some people might feel very comfortable, you know, saying that they're a person who stutters, or, you know, whatever the identity is. Some people might be comfortable expressing that out in the open, full blast. and some people might not be. I think everybody is on a journey and everyone is on different places in that journey. And people always have to do what's comfortable for them. So if a person is very comfortable advocating um, themselves as a person who stutters in the open, I think that's fine. But some people are on different parts of that journey and may not be as comfortable. Or for some people, maybe their stuttering is really just not a salient part of their identity, even though they acknowledge that they stutter. So I don't think that they necessarily have to advocate that if they don't choose to. So I don't think it's an all or nothing thing. I think there definitely are different degrees of how people can
Right.
choose to express their identity.
That was I have to go back and listen to that a couple times. There was a lot of wisdom packed in there, but there's no one I would listen to more than you,
Oh,
both because of who you are, but also because of how much time you've invested in understanding and looking at this topic. I want to ask you one question from Tom, fascinating question, but I also just wanted to reflect on that. So you would say it could be a function of your stage of change, of where you're at in your own personal journey, your readiness. A person at a certain stage isn't ready to go into a self-help meeting, isn't ready to
mhm.
identify with that identity, whatever it is, stuttering or what have you. And that can be quote unquote developmentally appropriate and understandable and have permission for that.
Right.
And then someone later on may be ready to put it on the table. And actually, it's really important to them to put it on the table. It's an important part of exercising and flexing that and getting really comfortable with themselves and that thing, that identity.
Absolutely.
And in that phase, there could be certain social contexts and places and situations where they choose not to. And that's not a weakness. And then
Yeah.
they may get to another phase where they're so comfortable, it might not need to be as much of this front and center kind of putting it out there. It's a fascinating thing. So I just want to make one more plug. Derek is the man. That's number one. And it's been amazing. And I'm going to have one more question. But for anyone that's interested, I did pop in the comments two exciting things. One, for teens and adults who stutter, who want to just take a dabble and see what's this Transcending Stuttering Academy online course looking like? Free access. Okay, so you can sign up until the end of the year. You'll have full access to the whole thing. I'm really excited to get feedback so we can sharpen it and really co-create it together. I think it's amazing. People have given some really great feedback and input, including some people on this call. I don't want to mention them and leave anyone out, but I'm looking for feedback, and that's why it's available for free for people who stutter, teens and adults. Check it out, and the coupon code is GIVE. So you go to the website, schneiderspeech.com, go to the online course, coupon code GIVE. The second thing is we got some questions from speech therapists that want to learn about transcending stuttering. We're going to roll out something really awesome in 2021. I've been talking about it. It's not fully ready, but if early access, again, free, just sign up, schneiderspeech.com/SLP. We'll make sure that you get early access, early invite on that. And with that, I'll ask you Tom's question. And you and Tom go way back, and we both love him, and he's showering you with lots of love. Also, I just want to mention Steph is here, and she sends her regards. Hopefully she's breathing smooth. A lot of people appreciate Beyonce recognizing them, and there's just like more comments than I can track. But Tom says, for people who stutter, who are considering the path of speech pathology as a career,
Yes.
so many of them wonder, but I stutter. What is, is that going to be a detriment? Is that going to be a roadblock? What can I expect? And how would you answer that? How would you respond? There's so many wonderful
Yeah.
heroes and leaders in our field. In fact, the field was started by a bunch of people who stutter. Thank God today we have many among us who are people who stutter, and also among those doing the research and clinical leaders. What would you say to someone coming up the ranks and thinking about going into the field as a person who stutters?
I would just say just kind of what you just said there. Look at how many people in our field are people who stutter, who are clinicians, who are academics, who are researchers. I mean, there are a lot of people who stutter. And I mean, there's so much representation, I think, of people who stutter in our field, who do research and who are therapists, that I think I would just say plug into that, plug into that network. There are Facebook groups. Actually, there's a Facebook group called SLPs who stutter. So there are a lot of ways that you can link up to a group or another clinician who stutters and get the mentoring and support that you need. It definitely does not need to be, and I don't think it should be a roadblock at all. And I would say that if it is a roadblock, it's probably a roadblock for someone who doesn't really understand stuttering. But I would say go for it. Absolutely go for it.
And if they're thinking about it and they're feeling a little bit apprehensive, can they track you down and reach out for some input? Because everyone's saying you're such a great mentor, such a caring teacher and role model.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Send me an email, find me, Wayne State University. You can go to the website, get my email, or I'll put it in the comments. And I have to say that I have to be sure that I mention Camp Shout Out. Camp Shout Out, another turning point. Camp Shout Out taught me about holding space. And even though I was there in a trainee and a facilitator role, I feel like I learned the most from Camp. I mean, that place really just gave me a lot of confidence. It taught me about holding space. It taught me about courage. I mean, I just had to be sure that I mentioned how important Camp Shout Out was and is to my life as a person who stutters and as a person in general.
So if you're in the spirit of giving, there are many organizations that could use your support during these times. So at this moment, a good moment to just highlight Camp Shout Out. I'm sure you can go to their website and make a contribution. They've made a difference in Derek's journey. They've lit others on fire as well. Many of our friends on this call right now. Julie is here as well, and of course helping directly change the lives of young kids from around the country who stutter. So with that, sadly, we'll end this conversation, but it should be the beginning of many more. And again, I think the highlight is the differences. So just before I spoke with Derek, I had an amazing chat with Justin Matley. His life experience uniquely different, where his very pronounced stuttering did not create a big piece of his identity. It wasn't really front and center for him in his journey. Fascinating. So I think the takeaway to me is we need to become more nuanced and sophisticated in understanding the range of experiences.
Absolutely.
One should never talk to a Black person and think, oh, that's not how a Black person's supposed to talk.
Bingo.
Or
absolutely.
that a person who stutters, hey, what's up with that? You don't stutter like the guy in the movie. That's not stuttering, that's stammering. We can't own someone else's experience, but we can be curious, we can educate ourselves. And even if we do none of that or all of that, ultimately the best tool in our arsenal is listening. And that's why you should go for the free AirPod Pros, because you'll hear better. Thank you so much, Dr. Derek Daniels. And for everybody who joined us, please share, comment. Much love. I hope to see you soon.
Yes, same here. Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Derek. Hang on.